Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Monday, February 24th evening meeting of the Lincoln City Council. And I'd like us all to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silent meditation. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In accordance with LB 898, a copy of the Open Meetings Act is posted at the back of the chamber. The order of the business of the City Council is as follows. The clerk will call the items listed on the agenda under public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak on an item should come forward. After the clerk reads that item, the applicant and those in favor should speak first, then those opposed. The applicant may then make one brief, short rebuttal. Each speaker should begin by stating name, address, and whether you are speaking in favor of or in opposition to the item. Testimony is limited to 5 minutes per speaker. After all public hearings, the council will vote on resolutions and items listed under third reading. On the second and last meeting of the month, immediately prior to adjournment, anyone may speak on any issue not on the agenda for that date nor planned for a future agenda. And I believe tonight we have public comment after our regular city council meeting. And Teresa, can you please call the very first item of business?
Yes, we ask those of the general public coming forward to testify to please clearly state your name, spell your name, give your address, and sign in on the sign-in sheet lying on the podium. Testifiers may use either microphone, and there is a sign-in sheet by each microphone. We ask those individuals from city staff who are testifying to please state your name, title, and the department you work for. Our first item of business is our public hearing consent agenda. Items 1 through 3.
Okay, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on any of those items 1 through 3? Seeing none, I guess we can go on.
All right, we can vote on these items. Item 1A and 2A through C were introduced by Christensen.
So moved.
Second.
Introduced by Christensen, seconded by Ward. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Christensen?
Yes.
McGinnis?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Ward?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Bowers?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Next are our public hearing liquor resolutions. Those giving testimony are asked to come forward and raise their right hand for the clerk to administer the oath. After the oath, witnesses shall state their names and addresses. I will call items 4A and B together. They are the application of Family Dollar for a Class B liquor license at 2541 North 11th Street, Suite 10, and the related manager application of Louis Masters III. I will note for council that we have a request of the applicant to withdraw their application. If someone wished to make that motion.
I move these items be withdrawn from the agenda.
Second.
Introduced by Christensen, seconded by Washington. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Christensen?
Yes.
McGinnis?
Ask the legal. Let's ask.
Quick question, point of privilege. Since I wasn't here for the before and I abstained, do I need to abstain from this withdrawal vote?
Jeff Kirkpatrick, City Attorney. The fact that you weren't here or weren't present during the earlier hearing doesn't prevent you from voting on this motion. And any issue that you may have had about a perceived conflict of interest doesn't seem applicable to this motion since it's the applicant that's asking for it to be withdrawn.
Okay, thank you.
So, your turn.
So I vote yes.
Okay. Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Ward?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Bowers?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Next then is item 4C, hearing on the request of Craft Axe Throwing LLC, doing business as Craft Axe Throwing, holder of a Class A liquor license located at 1821 N Street, to amend the restriction that customers be restricted to consuming no more than 2 drinks before or while in possession of a weapon. Would you raise your right hands? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth as you verily believe it to be?
I do.
Thank you. Just state your names and addresses.
Yeah, my name is Cabe Harwood, 3715 Everett Street.
Olivia German, 914 South 28th Street.
Welcome. Please tell us a little bit about your application that you'd like us to revise or reconsider.
Yes, we're hoping to amend our current resolution, which has a 2-drink maximum before and during the time that a participant is throwing, to 4 drinks, mainly to encourage just some longer throwing sessions. We have a lot of parties that want to be there an hour and a half. We don't foresee our beer sales. I think company-wide, it's currently at 1.5 beers per customer is our average, and we don't really see that ever, or we don't plan to have this necessarily be a bar or, have most of our sales be motivated by drinks, even with an increase.
Ms. German, did you have some remarks you'd like to make?
I'm mostly here in support of, I don't work for Lincoln Craft Axe Throwing. I'm actually a director of experience for Craft Axe Throwing as a company. So I'm mostly here for support and to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, terrific. Does anyone have any questions? Roy?
So you're representing the company as a whole, correct, Ms. German?
Yeah, I specifically work with customer experience.
Okay, and so how many Craft Axe establishments are there outside of Nebraska?
There are currently 6 total, and we're working on opening a 7th.
Okay. Have you had any issues at any of your locations outside of Nebraska?
Nope.
How about in the location in Omaha?
No.
Madam Chair?
Yes, of
So
course.
I just wanted to ask, was there consideration given to increase to 3 beers rather than 4, or the reasoning to double from 2 to 4 if it wasn't to increase beer sales? Or could you explain that a little bit?
There was. We personally felt like 4 was enough that, well, to be clear, like this doesn't necessarily mean that everyone will be allowed 4 within an hour. Our tolerance for what we consider to be overserved is still very high, or our standard for that. 3, there are people that, again, a lot of other locations have 2 and 3 hour throwing sessions, so 4 was more to help accommodate those as well.
For the length of time. So 4 beers over, is it a measure of time, or is it a measure of how the person is behaving?
So we didn't necessarily present that as something we wanted to write out, but our own internal policing, we were going to set up no more than 2 beers within a half-hour period of time. But we'd totally be open to, again, making it so that, there maybe after an hour, then it would move up to you could have 4 or more, something like that.
And you may have indicated this, and I apologize if I missed it. Do you sell hard liquor or just a beer?
We just have a beer license.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I have a couple of questions about the beer you sell. So it's craft beer, and can you tell us a little bit about the alcohol content of this beer? So if I'm looking at 4 beers, how much alcohol might someone consume?
Correct. So I do believe we haven't gone over in terms of, on the resolution, it's defined as a drink limit, so 2. Mm-hmm. We haven't gone over 16 ounces of beer, and I do believe our highest alcohol by volume is 7.2%.
Oh, Roy?
Ms. German, to your knowledge, are there any drink limitations any of your other locations, either Omaha or outside the state?
Right now, only Lincoln that's our only location with a limit.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Have you had customers object to only being able to drink 2 beers? Or have them leave, or how does that work?
No, we've never had them leave. We have had some people, for the majority of the customers that come in, they say, yeah, that makes sense. They're completely fine with a 2-drink limit. We have had a certain amount of reviews, both online and in our own internal polling, that show people would like to have a 3rd or 4th while in our facility.
And so I think you said this earlier, this would increase the number of work parties or events you might be able to book. Is that part of the intent that happens in your other locations?
Correct.
Am I understanding that correctly? Okay, thank you.
I have a question. So if you have no intention of participating in the axe throwing, can you have more than 2 beers?
Yes.
So you can have as many beers as you want, just so long as you don't throw the axe.
Correct.
And how do you keep track of that?
So we have a wristband system where the first drink is already marked, and then for each time someone comes up to buy another beer, that is also marked. We will not give out a beer if someone buys more than one until the other person that would be receiving the beverage has approached our counter, or we've gone to them and individually marked their wristbands.
Okay, so I could go just have a great time watching my friends throw the axe, and I could have as many beers as I wanted.
Correct. We will still keep track on a wristband system just to make it easier for all of our employees to keep track of customers.
And then at the other locations, do they just only offer beer, or can you serve all other forms of alcohol at the other locations?
We serve pretty much across the company. We serve beer and then cider and seltzers.
Cider and seltzers at all the other locations outside of Lincoln.
Correct.
Okay, any other questions? No? Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Okay, is there anyone else in the audience that would like to testify on this item? Does anyone have any questions for staff? I'm looking at Roy. No?
No, I think
Okay.
I'm pretty clear. We could ask. You can open.
Yeah,
Do that. Let's go on the record and do that.
Okay.
Tanya Peters, Assistant City Attorney.
Can you tell us what we had a discussion in the Internal Liquor Committee about this business and the business model. Could you review for the rest of the council what was discussed there?
Okay. Do you want me to also just kind of go over why we're here again?
Yep.
Okay. So, City Council put a restriction on their license of a maximum of 2 drinks prior to throwing the axes or while they're throwing. After that, they can have as many as they want. If they're not throwing, they can have as many as they want. So it's just on what we're going to call players, I guess, for today. The applicant asked for a show cause hearing before the Liquor Commission to either have that removed or to be altered. We had a hearing on February 4th, and I didn't have a real sense from council any support of the 2-drink or opposition to limit it. So I was going to defer to the Liquor Commission. The Liquor Commission really wanted the council's input. You placed the restriction on there. They didn't want to be disrespectful and take it off without some input from you, or to alter it without some input from you. So they asked me to bring it back to City Council. This is kind of unusual. There's no process wrote down, so we put it on your agenda with what the applicant had asked. I had some conversations with the applicants after that show cause. What works for you? What works for your business? They requested to be able to serve 4 drinks prior to a person throwing, or to include while they're throwing. So again, there wouldn't be any restrictions after they're throwing or if they're not throwing. They have an armband system that they're proposing. It was a kind of complex for me. It might work well for them, but I didn't want to tie that to them, to that system in this resolution. But basically, their armband system would work for this, what they're currently doing now. They would just, instead of 2, they could hashtag a couple more, or, the little chicken scratch and a couple more on the band. So that would work. It's a pretty good system, right, to kind of keep track of what everybody's drinking, so kudos to them. And what I've talked to you all about in one form or another is that this is the only restriction that I could find in the state. informally did some Google searching. It appears that no other government has placed a similar restriction on a licensee. Some of them self-imposed rules, like no more than 2 drinks per hour, but those appear to be self-imposed. There was only one facility, I want to say it's out of Michigan, that had some incidences. They had a 1-day suspension and had to change some of their practices. Like, for example, they were allowing people to throw without shoes on or with just flip-flops on. So there were some other issues associated with that that we're not seeing at these locations. And just comparing this location to Omaha location, this location is the only one with a restriction. Some of the other Omaha businesses, not theirs, have like a Class C or a Class I, which would allow hard liquor to be served in addition. So one of the things I noted on these is they've kind of restricted themselves to beer. It does include cider on that license, but they are not selling hard liquor, which I think we would have more concerns if they were. I think that summarizes them. I might have forgot some of the different considerations, but what's before you now is a resolution to increase the restriction to 4. Okay. There was an alternative resolution that would remove the restriction altogether, but ask that the Liquor Commission place a no liquor law violation for 1 year policy. So that way, if there's a problem, the Liquor Commission can pull them back. In all honesty, they can pull them back at any time if there's problems, and we can request a show cause hearing if there are problems. We can long form them and bring them back. So we do have some safeguards. We also have manager permits and server seller permits that we can act on.
Right.
If we were to do the amendment you're talking about, remove the restriction and do a 1-year probationary period, are there other ordinances the city could use if needed to control a situation that got out of hand?
Yeah, besides the server seller, selling to minors, selling to over-intoxicated, besides all of those, we do have a disorderly house ordinance, and we have used it against businesses. So if you are operating that you are a nuisance, right, and we've told you that you've been a nuisance, and I'm using that term loosely, we can cite you. And I think if my memory is right, the first violation minimum is $250. It's not a lot, but it certainly is an option, and it's public. So that's another option, and that can go up to $500 fine.
Sandra.
Madam Chair, thank you. I appreciate the fact that you've been so diligent in following through and working with the applicant. I have some concern with raising it to 4 drinks prior to throwing or while they're throwing. And it's not that I have a problem with them having alcohol prior to picking up a weapon as much as it is us putting down the 4-drink rule and then having servers maybe mistakenly think that the city has said yes to 4 drinks and using that as the rule or the limitation. And I think I would be more comfortable with no drink limitations, so removing all of the limitations with the provisional for the probationary period for 1 year.
Yeah, and you can look at that both ways. No matter what, they're still prohibited from serving someone that is over intoxicated, right?
Right.
So you can look at this of saying, hey, I'm going to clarify that when we get to 4, it's clearly too much, but you still have to use your best judgment before that point, right? Or you treat them like all other businesses where you can't overserve. We're not going to tell you how much is overservice, but if we see it, right, we're going to take action. And the other thing we really haven't talked about is nothing stops a current bar from becoming an axe throwing place. They don't have to come to us and ask permission. This one just happens to be an axe throwing business that came to us to ask for a liquor license. So we could have someone else get in the business at any point in time and not have a restriction on them.
Madam Chair.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I too was really, I got to say, I couldn't get to approving the 4 beer or the 4 drink limitation. And Tanya, thank you for the time you spent on the telephone with me this morning, and I talked to, I think, all of my colleagues as well. I am much more comfortable with the replacement resolution, and I do think we need to let businesses decide on their own. To your point about they do and have done an amazing job of making sure that people are not overserved. Clearly, you have an amazing track record, and thank you for that, and letting people have fun and doing what they enjoy, but while being safe. And so, to your point, Ms. Peters, about the Craft Axe business was a business that came to us for a liquor license, but there are many bars in Lincoln that police customers all the time. And so I think we need to allow businesses to do that. They have that responsibility. So I appreciate this substitute resolution, and I am much more comfortable. I just was doing the gut check for several days and could not get to that 4, allowing that 4 drinks, and I think it's up to the businesses to decide that. And so I just want to be on record as having said that. So thank you for all your due diligence and research.
You're welcome. And I think we can go back to the council that approved this. At the time, it was unknown. And we were being cautious, and I think that was the right thing to do. And now we have a time period where we've experienced it. We've seen it grow in other places and had a little bit more to go on. We may see other businesses evolve where we want to use that same caution at the very beginning and then come back and go, were we right, or do we need to change it? And that's the ability of our system, is that we can be flexible. So,
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. We can go on to the next item.
All right, I'll call items 4D and E together. They're the application of McKinney's Pub for a special designated license to cover an outdoor area measuring approximately 75 feet by 75 feet in P Street, 7th to 8th Streets on March 14th between 8 a.m. and 12 a.m., and the application to cover an outdoor area measuring approximately 30 feet by 40 feet in P Street, 7th to 8th Streets on March 17th between 8 a.m. and 12 a.m. No on STLs. Not on STLs.
Welcome. Tell us a little bit about your application and the 2 events that you are requesting the special designated license.
Well, this is for McKinney's Irish Pub. We've done a St. Patrick's Day celebration every year. This will be the 6th time that we've had this event. We changed it a little bit this year. We kind of learned some things. I guess we learn as we go.
Yes.
We learned some things last year,
and
that we did it on a Sunday, and people really would rather come out on Saturday. And so we flipped it back to Saturday, the 14th, and then we'll do an abbreviated version on Tuesday, the actual day of St. Patrick's Day, which will be no tent and no, just beer garden area.
Okay. Any questions? Thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to testify on this item? Seeing none, I think we can vote.
Okay, I would like to offer the substitute resolution for 4C.
I'm going to read it first.
You need to read it first.
Move it first.
Okay, all right, let's move it.
Okay.
I move approval of item 4C.
Second.
I would like to offer a substitution instead of the one presented to us that allows a 4-drink limit. I would offer that we have no limits, and then we allow them to operate for 1 year without any violations.
Is there
Second.
Introduced by Washington, seconded by Christensen. Any discussion? Benny?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Ms. Peters said, a year ago, this establishment came forward, and I was terrified. And they've operated for a year with no incident, and I think it's prudent that we do this.
Any other discussion? I would like to make a comment that I think it's a bad idea. I have always thought it a bad idea to mix drinking in the possession of a weapon. And I thought the 2-drink limit was a very appropriate way to handle this situation, particularly when weapons are involved. You know, it doesn't curtail the merriment of everyone else that comes to watch you throw and participate. I think it's just a very safe, practical way of making sure that we keep everyone safer. So I am going to oppose this amendment. Please call the roll.
Christensen,
Yes.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Raybold,
No.
Schob,
Yes.
Ward,
Yes.
Washington,
Yes.
Bowers.
Yes.
Motion carried 6-1. Now on the main motion. Christensen,
Yes.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Raybold,
No.
Schob,
Yes.
Ward,
Yes.
Washington,
Yes.
Bowers.
Yes.
Motion carried 6-1. Item 4D and C,
I move-
4D and E.
I move approval of items 4D and E.
Second.
Introduced by Christensen, seconded by McGinnis. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Christensen,
Yes.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Raybold,
Yes.
Schob,
Yes.
Ward,
Yes.
Washington,
Yes.
Bowers.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Next then, our public hearing resolutions. Item 5A is accepting and approving the report of new and pending claims against the city for January 15th through the 31st, 2020.
Hello, my name is Russ Pinion, Pinyan. I live at 2041 Hedge Apple Court here in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pinion. Can you tell us a little bit about your claim?
Yes, I was notified on the afternoon of the 27th by my property management of one of my rental properties that there had been a breach at my rental property. The police had knocked down the front door and the bedroom door and subsequently realized they were at the wrong address. And they had verbalized, or they'd verbally told the property manager that I should file a claim and turn it into the city attorney, which I promptly did. Shortly thereafter, or sometime thereafter, I received notice that it had been denied. They were going to recommend to the city council that they deny the claim. So I just brought some documentation to kind of maybe show some backstory on it. I do have some pictures that I could show. And I also, I made a copy for each one of the members of the city council if you want me to hand those out. Otherwise, I could put that on here too.
I think handing them to Teresa, our clerk, would be great, and then that way we can see them up close.
Awesome. Oh, sorry. There you are. Okay. I'll wait till you have those in hand.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so this first page is actually a statement that I had requested from the tenant. Again, this is a property that I have managed by a company, so I don't know this tenant personally. I just had the management company ask them for kind of a recap of what happened, but I'll just read it aloud quickly. I had sent this to Mr. Bowers, that's why it says that at the top. Here's an explanation of what happened. That morning, I was sitting at my computer in the dining room playing a game, and by the time I realized what was going on at my door, it was too late because I started to hear them beating on the door. I could hear the knocking before it happened, but I didn't realize that it was from my apartment. I thought it was coming from the apartment next door. After I started to hear them breaking in the door, I got up to see what was going on, and that's when a tactical geared policeman busts through with a ballistic shield and guns drawn, saying that they have a search warrant. They immediately tell me to get my hands up and lie on the ground, with which I complied. They then handcuffed me and started to interrogate me as to who else lives or is in my apartment. I kept telling them that no one is here, no one else lives here, and that I haven't done anything wrong. At first, I thought that this was some joke people play on others in online games where they call the SWAT team on you, and it's a prank called swatting. There were officers in and out of my apartment that wouldn't tell me much about what was going on, besides that they were looking for stolen property and that they had the wrong apartment. So that was just a recap from him. I brought, on the second page there is just what the police report, where it just says that it's clear there was no criminal activity in that apartment where they broke the door down. I should say that not only did they break the front door down, but after they had him in handcuffs, they broke the bedroom door, which was not locked. So I don't know if their adrenaline was pumping, but they were a little overzealous in that fact. And then on page 3 is just the letter they got on the denial, and then on page 4 is the actual invoice that I had to replace the door because it was inoperable. There was no door there when they got done with it. And then the pictures, you can't see them too well, but you can see the doorknob there is removed from the door about 2 inches on that picture. This is the hole that they broke in the door, below the doorknob, the deadbolt, the doorknob, and then the hole. And then this is a little bit more clearer picture of the hole that they broke. So in essence, what I'm asking is that the door was broken to an apartment that was the wrong address. In the letter, if you read the letter from the assistant city attorney, it says that the reason they want to deny is because the tenant refused to open the door. According to his statement, he did not refuse to open the door, he didn't get to the door. Now, I can tell you that I quite often do not answer my door. If somebody taps on my door, a lot of times I'll sit there. He did not realize that this was his door that was being knocked on. When he did realize it, he started to head towards the door, and by that time they were beating on it and they broke it down. So I think the statement in the letter that he refused to open the door, according to the information I've got, is incorrect. So I'm asking that the city pay for the door repair.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of Mr. Pinion?
I guess I have a couple of questions.
Oh, sure. Great.
Did your, one, thank you for coming down here. I know this is not probably the most comfortable or the most fun you've had today. Did your tenant tell you whether or not the police had announced themselves as Lincoln Police Department, or this is the police?
He did not tell me that. They did announce it when they were breaking the door open.
Well,
yeah.
Okay.
But not until they had the door open did he realize it was the police. I don't think that there was any malice. I mean, the police weren't just looking for something to do, but I do think that they made a mistake.
Okay. Jeff, could you please come up?
Thank you. I'm going to have the city attorney talk to you.
It sounds like this property address is at 2335 B Street, apartment number 2.
Yes. Jeff Kirkpatrick, City Attorney.
Could you tell us a little bit about the warrant, what address it was made out to?
The
Which
warrant was
apartment?
made out to apartment number 2.
At this
And
address?
at this address, this was the apartment that was broken into. So they had a warrant to serve on this particular address. It wasn't a matter of they had a warrant for apartment number 4 and they broke down the door of apartment number 2. So they had a warrant for the apartment they broke into. And what they did when they arrived is they followed their procedure when you have a warrant to serve at night, which is they knocked on the door, they announced, Lincoln Police, we have a warrant, and then essentially they knocked on the door they knocked on the door and announced themselves every 10 seconds and gave him 30 seconds in order to respond. And when he didn't respond in 30 seconds, that's when they followed their procedure and broke down the door. Because any longer than that, you're giving, obviously they're expecting there to be some evidence, and you don't want to give the person you're serving the warrant on time to flee or to destroy evidence. And so that's why you've got that fairly regulated policy as far as knocking, announcing, but a relatively short time frame. And so this falls within, on claims, you see the same types of claims over and over again, or you will. Some of these you haven't seen yet. We're still waiting for those pothole surge, but we're working on it.
In tree limbs.
In trees. Well, those are more for summer. You get the leaves on, then you have the trees fall down. But as far as break-in cases like this, these are either calls for welfare check or their warrants being served. And we typically we recommend that you deny payment for that because under state law, we're not required to pay for when we break down the door because somebody's asked for welfare check, and for all we know, there could be somebody that's in a coma inside that apartment or that house, and we need to get inside to see if they're alive or not to perhaps save lives, or when we have a warrant and we have exigent circumstances where we have to break down the door in order to serve the warrant. And so you have a number of cases that come before you on these sorts of circumstances where someone says, well, I don't know why I should have to pay. I didn't call for a welfare check. You know, the reason why I wasn't answering my phone was I was out of the country. So of course I couldn't respond to the door when they knocked on the door to check my welfare. So why should I have to pay for the damage that was done? And the answer is, well, because we have to come out and try to save lives. We have to enforce these warrants. And so in this case, where you have the landlord appearing before you and saying, why should I have to pay because my tenant didn't come to the door in time, my response would be, well, we're not required to pay by law. And this might be a circumstance where you go back to your tenant and say, the damage was caused because you were slow in responding or non-responsive, didn't say, I'm coming, didn't respond to see if maybe it was the apartment door. Maybe this should be covered under his deposit. Because the damage at the end of the day was caused not by the police breaking down the door, but by him failing to respond in the 30 seconds they gave him to respond. When they said, this is the police department, we have a warrant.
Right.
Probably a couple of years ago, the council saw another case almost exactly like this, not quite exactly, but pretty close. And the council denied that claim. What are the options if we deny this claim?
Well, like I said, he's got a couple of options. One is he can go back to his tenant and say, I think you're responsible for this. I'm going to take it out of your damage deposit, and that's between him and the tenant. And I'm not going to give any opinion as to whether I think he would win or lose that or should win or lose that. But the other would be to go to take us to court. And this is a claim for under $1,000, so he could file against us in small claims court. The last thing I'd like to address is the issue about the police department saying you can file a claim. And you will often have claimants coming here and say, they told me I could file a claim. And I think what oftentimes people hear is, you can file a claim and we will pay it. And that's not what we mean when whether it's the fire department, the police department, somebody with the street department, whoever says file a claim. What is meant by that is file a claim and we'll evaluate. Because we can't tell you whether we can pay the claim or not until we've done an investigation, until we know what actually occurred. And many times we do pay claims. And that, every time you see a claims report in front of you, or almost every time, you'll see there are a number of claims that have been paid because we completed the investigation, we concluded that the city, for whatever reason, was at fault, and we paid that claim. And so I understand why people feel like, well, they told me to file a claim and I did, now they're denying it. It's not that we're playing a game with them. It's not that we're trying to mislead people, but we can't start the process of doing the investigation until we have the claim.
Okay, Benny.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Then James.
Mr. Kirkpatrick, I'm a little bit hung up on the right apartment, wrong apartment.
Okay.
It was right because of the warrant,
Yes.
but it was wrong because it wasn't the apartment. Help me understand.
It was the right building. It was, I believe, a quadplex. And so you had an investigation going on. The police department was conducting surveillance, and they knew essentially the window of I think the back door of the person, the suspect. What they didn't understand was the makeup, the
Orientation
way that
of apartments.
the doors.
in the building? Yeah.
Right, and so that's why they said door number 2. They didn't go in because they didn't want to be spotted, so they thought it was door number 2. It was actually apartment number 4, would have been the appropriate apartment where I think they did find evidence and completed the arrest. And so that was the mistaken assumption they made in applying for the warrant. That's why they had apartment number 2. Now, if they had come with that warrant and broken down apartment number 4, then they would have been in violation of law because they had the warrant only applied to apartment number 2. But that was what caused the the mistake as far as what apartment they should be going to.
Forgive me for nitpicking, but you said mistake a couple of times. Is that really what it was? The police made a mistake by misidentifying the apartment? And that's why we're here, or?
Well, we could be here regardless. I mean, we did break down that door. So if it was the apartment number 4, same building, Mr. Pinion could be here with essentially what I would say is the same argument. We had a warrant, we broke down the door. That's the question I would suggest is in front of the council. When you have a warrant, you break down the door, should the police department pay for that damage? And I will tell you that our policy in the law department is to recommend denial in those cases.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
James?
That was my same question. How did the mistake happen? And so I just want to make sure I got this right in my mind. So officer saw the window that they wanted to get this person at. Then they made the assumption that it was apartment number 2 instead of apartment number 4 or whatever, called in a warrant, got a warrant for apartment number 2, and that's how they got the wrong one, right?
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, I just have a comment to make, but I am struggling with this one because clearly a mistake was made, you know? It's like if you go into surgery and the doctor amputates the wrong leg, that's why they make the patient clearly identify which leg is the problem leg and which leg is the one that surgery should be done on. And so, you know, there's checks and balances, and I feel that there weren't sufficient checks to even get the warrant, and a mistake was made. So I don't know how typically it's happened, because even the tenant said that the law enforcement officer told them that they had the wrong apartment.
Well, they didn't have the wrong apartment from the standpoint if they would have broken into apartment number 4 with that warrant they had, they would have violated the law there. So I would suggest to you they misidentified the apartment, but they properly carried out the warrant, which was their job to properly carry out the warrant. And they followed procedure as far as knocking and announcing. And then, you know, you cannot hesitate. And if you're asking them to do an adequate investigation, sometimes it causes an issue if you go into the apartment building and you're identified and then they move the evidence.
Thank you. Benny, do
I'm
you
sorry,
have a
thank you.
question?
I'm going to go through this one more time. So if the police had identified it as apartment number 4, if the police had breached the door, and if a suspect had been arrested, and Mr. Pinion still suffered damages, he would have less of a leg to stand on because we followed procedure.
If we had a warrant for apartment number 4.
And we arrested somebody, and the police did everything right, he still has a damaged door.
He still has a damaged door. Yeah, but I guess the point that I am making from the position of the law department is we think those situations are the same.
Yeah.
We served a warrant, we broke down the door because there was someone inside and they didn't come to the door. And under those conditions, we recommend that claim be denied.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I guess just for the record, if this tenant would have been the bad guy, I would support the recommendation, but I'm struggling as well because they weren't the bad guys here and bad men or women. So, yeah, this one gives me a little more pause.
And if I can say, I understand the concern, and we have the same situation sometimes when we're doing a welfare check, where there's no bad person. There's just someone that there's concerns about, and there's a family member or a neighbor or a friend that calls in and asks LFR to respond and do a welfare check, or the LPD to respond and do a welfare check, and damage is done. Perhaps in retrospect, needlessly, but you still want the first responder to act appropriately and try to save a life. Or in this case, you want them to follow their procedure and enforce the warrant. And then you get damage that occurs, and the state law says we don't need to pay in those cases, and we try to be consistent in that regard.
I appreciate that. I've had a break-in in my home, and I wasn't the bad person either. I clearly It wasn't the police that broke in, obviously, but, so what's that? I sympathize, because it is a big expense to repair, and when you're not the victim, you feel victimized, so thank you very much.
Sandra?
There are a lot of pieces here, and it is a very difficult decision to make. What I don't want to do is second-guess the police department. They did have a warrant, and they executed the warrant the way they were supposed to execute the warrant. It's not the officers who broke in who are at fault here. They did what they were supposed to do, and it sounds like they followed procedure. This is something that happened, I'm going to just say downtown, in identifying which apartment should be approached. But it's certainly not the officers on duty that evening who broke down the door. So it is hard to put them at fault. They did what they were supposed to do. In this case, even though the state law does not insist that the city pay this, there's no law that says we have to pay this, I am left with a very hard question that the surveillance did not come to the right conclusion. And that's a challenge, because it is, as my colleague said, a very large expense, and you do feel victimized when you have that large bill in front of you, and it was not supposed to be that apartment, it was supposed to be another.
Roy?
I agree with what Sandra has said, especially about this being a complex situation, and because of that, I think this belongs in a court of law, not in front of a city council.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that want to testify on this item? Or is there anyone else that would like to testify on other pending claims before the city council? Yes, sir, you may rebut.
First of all, thank you very much for listening to this. Second of all, I believe if you look at the police report, it says 0830. I think I heard someone say 8:30 at night. 0830, that's in the morning. Okay. There was somebody in apartment number 4. After a tap on the door, they answered, and the problem, however, I'm not sure, it was resolved. The police may not have been at fault, but somebody was. And it was not my tenant, and it was not me. So whoever decided that that was the right apartment, especially considering the gravity of guns being pulled, handcuffs, door being broken, I think you should be pretty darn sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to testify on any other claim? Okay, we can move on.
All right, I'll call item 5B, placing a charter amendment on the May 2020 primary election ballot that amends Article 9, Section 27 of the charter to correct a typographical error relating to appropriations by amending a reference from Article 7, Section 7 to Article 7, Section 4.
Good evening. My name is Don Stating. I currently serve as the chairman of the Charter Revision Commission, and we're here appearing today on behalf of the commission to respond to any questions the council may have regarding those amendments we're recommending.
Does anyone have any questions on item 5B? Okay, I think
Good on 5B.
we're all good on 5B.
All right, we'll call 5C, placing a charter amendment on the May 2020 primary election ballot that amends Article 4, Section 9 of the charter relating to chair and vice chair of the council to change chairman to chair and authorizing the chair to serve as acting mayor only during periods when the mayor is unable to serve, but not when the mayor is just absent from the city.
This amendment was offered because of the fact that under the currently, if the mayor is out of the city limits, then in fact the designated vice chairman, I think it is, of the city council becomes the acting mayor. And because of technological changes today, we felt that we needed to update that provision of the charter so that it would be that the mayor was unable to serve. Because with today's cell phones and in the automobiles and everything else like this, to go to Seward doesn't necessarily put you out of connection to be able to perform and make a decision on behalf of the city. That's why we offered the amendment, or recommend the amendment.
Are there any questions?
I have a
James.
question. Was there any, as the Charter Revision Committee was having this conversation, was there any discussion about defining unable to serve?
Not that I recall.
Okay.
It is a, I would agree with you, one could argue that that's there, but obviously if they're not reachable and they cannot be timely connected with to make a decision, they're unable to serve. You have to go to the alternate at that time, the backup person.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, we can go on to the next one.
All right, 5D, placing a charter amendment on the May 2020 primary election ballot that amends Article 4, Section 12, Article 7, Section 2, and Article 8, Section 5 to increase the bid threshold requirement from $25,000 to $50,000, makes corresponding changes to mayor's authority to approve contracts in excess of $50,000, and delegates execution of contracts or purchases of less than $50,000, adds responsive to definition of lowest responsible bidder in Article 7, Section 2, and Article 8, Section 5, removes the requirement of 3 informal bids for purchases and contracts of less than $50,000, and substitutes the more accurate term of rebid instead of re-advertise if the city rejects all bids and reopens the bidding process.
This is our attempt to keep the charter current with regard to the fact that based upon inflation, $25,000 versus $50,000, it's also to align the similar authority already existing with the state of Nebraska, the University of Lincoln, or University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and the Lancaster County.
Any questions? I guess, Bob Waller, could you come forward and tell us a little bit more about where the county is on some of their restrictions and the state of Nebraska?
Bob Wallace, City Purchasing Agent. So the state moved from a $20 to a $50,000 threshold about 3 years ago. The County Purchasing Act was changed last year in July, and after that time, the county changed their threshold also to $50,000 from the $20,000 that they originally had. One of the things on this change is that we're changing the maximum amount of a formal bid, which means that it has to go to the newspaper and be advertised prior to it going out. And the thing about it is that with our e-bid system, we're still notifying our vendors of all of these bids, regardless of what that value is between the $3,000 and the $50,000. It's just that we don't have to go through that extra step of waiting to advertise it in the newspaper and then placing it in there and then issuing the bid at that point.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Any other questions for Mr. Walla? Okay.
I'd like to thank you all for your service to the city.
I'd like to thank you.
Hey, thank you for your service on the Charter Review Commission. All right, is there anyone else in the audience that would like to testify on either of these 3 items I should have asked on the Charter Revision recommendations? Okay, we can move on.
All right, we can vote on these items then. Item 5A is the report of claims against the city, introduced by Bowers.
So moved.
Second.
Introduced by Bowers, seconded by Christensen. Roy?
I have complete sympathy with how members of the council feel about this issue in front of us, because I've had to make that decision, as you know, many times. My concerns are, I think, threefold. One, we can set a precedent that we don't want to set if we were to approve this claim. Probably the second thing is, this, in my opinion, as I've already expressed, belongs in front of a court, not in front of the council. And number 3, I believe we are well served by the city law department and would be well advised to follow their recommendations.
Any other comments?
I would like to make a motion to accept,
Remove from the list.
remove from the denial list Mr. Pinion's claim. And the reason for that
Is there a
is.
second?
Oh, sorry.
Second.
And thank you, Councilwoman. And the reason for that is I don't believe, I don't want to second guess our police officers. And I think that they make a lot of very tough decisions every single day. And I believe that you can do everything that you think is right and still have situations like this. And I believe that Mr. Pinion had something happen to his property simply because an error was made. And that is why I am offering up this amendment to accept his claim or remove from denial his claim.
So you want to remove his claim from the denied list and move it to the approved list?
Correct.
Okay.
Is there any other discussion on this amendment? I would like to state that I do support this, and I don't think it detracts from our law department, and I don't think it detracts from the Lincoln Police Department and the fine work that they do. However, when a mistake is made, it is the purview of the city council to review and approve, review and deny all the claims. That's why it comes before us. So we have the authority to make these tough decisions. And we know a mistake was made, not certainly by the law enforcement officers as they were delivering the warrant, but it was made on behalf of the individual or whoever said it was this apartment. And a mistake has been made, but it's up to us to rectify these mistakes. So I certainly will support that amendment. And that we remove this claim from Mr. Pinion from the denial to the approved. Please call the roll on this amendment.
Christensen?
No?
Yes.
McGinnis?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
No.
Ward?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Bowers?
Yes.
Motion carried 4-2.
Okay, and then on the rest of the,
On the main motion?
on the main motion of the claims.
Christensen?
Yes.
McGinnis?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Ward?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Bowers?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 5B is placing a charter amendment on the May 2020 primary election to correct a typographical error introduced by Bowers.
So moved.
Second.
Introduced by Bowers, seconded by Christensen. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Christensen?
Yes.
McGinnis?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Ward?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Bowers?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. 5C is placing a charter amendment on the May 2020 primary election ballot that amends Article 4, Section 9 of the charter relating to chair and vice chair of the council to change chairman to chair and authorizing the chair to serve as acting mayor only during periods when the mayor is unable to serve, but not when the mayor is just absent from the city. Introduced by McGinnis.
So moved.
Second.
Introduced by McGinnis, seconded by Washington. Any discussion?
Madam Chair.
Go that
Yes.
way first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am looking for more definitions of what unable to serve might mean, and I don't know if Mr. Stating is still here or not, but I would like to draw on my own experience, which most recently was in the governor's office. Others have other experience, but when the leading CEO of any level of government is out of town, I think our citizens need oftentimes and deserve, in a crisis situation or emergency situation, to know that things are being handled in real time by someone on the ground. And so I would like to see us define unable to serve before we move forward with that. With 5C, with this portion of what's been recommended to us.
Are you recommending to delay, or are you recommending to delay and turn it back to the Charter Revision Commission for further definition, or?
Yes, if I would make a motion to delay until we have a definition, either through the Charter Revision Commission or city law, whichever may be recommended. So I would put that in the form of a motion to delay until we can define that from the Charter Revision Commission.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay.
Comment?
Representative
Go first.
Can I ask a question?
Of course,
All
yes.
right. This question is for City Attorney Jeff Kirkpatrick. Mr. Kirkpatrick, there is, I know, a desire to see some of these charter revisions go on the May ballot, the spring ballot. I would like to know if we were to delay this, if this motion, the amendment carries, what is the drop dead date for getting the language prepared for the ballot?
For May?
For May.
Tonight. It really is tonight. It has to be by March 1st. So if you, unless you want to have a special meeting, it really is tonight. What I would tell you, if you look at other municipalities or states, this language about being unable to serve is very common. To have anything more than that is uncommon. I did, I think, mention to some people in a discussion about this charter amendment that if you look at the Omaha Charter, they go into more detail, and they're clearly anticipating when a mayor is incapacitated but unwilling to admit that, because they do have a provision for the appointment of 3 doctors who are paid at a commensurate rate to examine the mayor and come back and say, yes, this mayor is unable to serve. That is unusual to have that kind of detail. What I would suggest would make some sense, because I do understand the concern about unable to serve. What does that mean? Does it mean that you're in an airplane for a couple of hours? Does that mean that you've had a stroke and are unable to communicate? There's a wide variety of things that you may or may not personally consider to be unable to serve. That may be something that would be very fitting to have in the city code. If this passes, or even if it doesn't pass, it's certainly within the authority and power of this council to amend the city code and put in a definition of unable to serve. So the language unable to serve is going to stay in the charter regardless, unless you try to take that out tonight and put it before the voters, and the voters would approve that. And so that might be something that you consider regardless. If you feel like unable to serve is too vague, to put the definition into the code, which makes it easier to fine tune down the road without having to go to a vote of the people.
Right.
3 observations on this. One, I think this charter amendment reflects the reality of what goes on right now most of the time, that the mayor remains in contact through electronically, and that's how decisions continue to be made for the most part. 2, when we have a document like a state constitution, Constitution of the United States, or the charter of our city, broad language is preferred over specific language, because broad language will allow for interpretation, changing situations in the future. If they had written this current amendment that's proposed to our charter, if that had been written into the charter originally, we wouldn't even be discussing this right now, because right now, being out of town is too specific. It was specific to the era in when it was written, but was not foreseen our current situation. So we can write this in general language, so we can leave it open to unforeseen circumstances in a future that we haven't even imagined. And so third, which is the point that also Jeff Kirkpatrick made, was the specifics go into an ordinance. And that's the way we've done things with our charter since the first of the charter. When there's need to clarify and make things specific, we put them in ordinances, because ordinances are significantly easier to change than the charter. So I'm not going to support this motion.
Does anyone?
I just had another question for Mr. Kirkpatrick, if I may. Thank you for coming back up. So Is there a reason we get this today or a week ago, and when in fact you're telling us that tonight is, if we don't take action, that now the burden's on us? So
I
tell us
understand
why.
that you would prefer to have more time, and I apologize for that. I mean, certainly that would have been preferable. I mean, it was fortunate, in part, you have to vote tonight rather than having a week because there was no meeting last week.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to get it for a first reading. You had the 2 weeks to consider it. Would it have been better for your purposes if the Charter Revision Commission had gotten this to you a month ago to vote on? Yes, and I apologize for that. We started meeting on this in December. The Charter Revision Commission had subcommittee meetings in early January and then met at the end of January. And so that kind of compressed the calendar more than would have been preferable. I would say, since I've got the chance to be up here, I'm very appreciative of the Charter Revision Commission. They had a lot of different items before them that they talked about, spent a fair amount of time and thought on. I think we're very fortunate the quality of the people we have on the Charter Revision Commission. They do volunteer their time, but they're very thoughtful, experienced people. And I appreciate the opportunity to serve with them. Having said that, I do apologize that you're getting this with no time frame. I would also say if the thought process is, well, we want to have more definition, you could amend the code before the vote. In other words, amend it between now and the May ballot, which may affect how some people vote on it. And it would be appropriate to amend it. Even if it doesn't pass in May, you still would have put further definition into what is unable to serve, because that's going to stay in the charter regardless.
Understood, thank you. I would still, Madam Chair, just for comment purposes, with my motion, I think it's important that we have better defined despite the delay.
Jeff, I have a question for you.
Sorry.
Wanted to catch you before you sat down.
No, that's good. I've got my steps in tonight.
I have two questions, because when I first read it, I thought it was unusual that there was not more robust definition about unable to serve. Could you tell me again, what did the city of Omaha do? Did they go to the other extreme, or did they have that in ordinance about the 3 physicians? Or
No, that's actually in their charter.
That's in their charter, okay.
So they do go into that kind of, but they don't really define what that means. Well, I can't cite that verbatim, so I shouldn't really talk about what specific language they have about being incapacitated. What I would tell you, though, is I've looked at a number of different charters and constitutions, and it is very common for the language just to be unable to serve. And what does that mean? That's a pretty broad statement. I understand the concern about relying on that broad statement. The reason why I think the commission ended up making the recommendation that they did was it's a very simple change to make for the voters to consider. And it just takes out the concern. I mean, the question about what does unable to serve means was frankly there for decades. And that wasn't the purpose that the commission was dealing with. It was just being outside the city limits. And so by taking out those few words, they were able to address that specific concern. The question about what unable to serve means, they didn't spend much time talking about that. There was a little bit of conversation about that. But I think there is a large camp that would say you leave the charter relatively general and then you try to add further definition within the code.
Madam Chair?
I have one more question, too. So tell me, what happens if we delay and approve this motion to delay, and we toss it back to the Charter Revision Commission? What happens, would this come before us again, and do we put it on the ballot in November, or is it typical in the custom and tradition, do we put it on in May of 2021? Tell me, what the Charter Revision Commission has requested in the past and what it looks like with this scenario if we do delay it.
What I would suggest is rather than delaying it, because delay in this case means it's not going to be in the ballot in May, my suggestion would be that you just vote no. And the example I would give you would be from a year ago when the Charter Revision Commission brought a number of suggestions to you, and one of them had to do with the provisions as far as political activity or involvement of city employees. And it's kind of a convoluted section of the charter, and the changes, what I would suggest you were to improvement, were still somewhat convoluted. Those of you that were on the council might remember that discussion. And so that was voted down, was not placed on the ballot. It's the intention, I believe, of the Charter Revision Commission to revisit that and bring it back. We don't have that done yet because it's somewhat complicated, and the commission chose to focus on, well, we had a lot on their plate, and they had these three that they thought were simpler and easier to bring forward. But we will bring that back, I think, at some point. And so if you vote this down, I think the commission still thinks it's a good idea to make that change, but they will re-examine it from the standpoint of the concerns that were raised by the council. Now, the earliest, the commission could come back to you at any time, and you could then decide what election you want it on. The state law says you can have it at either a special election or a general election. And we have designated the primary election as a special election for the purpose of this charter change. I think the most likely thing, if you voted down, would be that they would visit about it and perhaps make some recommendations of this and also some other charter revisions in time for you to consider that and get it on the ballot in November, which is general election. I would expect a high turnout then.
So if we delay it, then most likely it would go on the November ballots?
If you delay it, then it stays on the council agenda until you vote on it again. If you vote it down, I think then the commission can always come back to you with a different recommendation in regard to this particular charter clause.
Okay, so you would prefer, instead of a delay, we just vote no?
It keeps the agenda cleaner.
Well, I mean, we've done a number of delays. I don't know if we want to specify a week or two delay, but if a delay in turning it back to the Charter Revision Commission, is that what it says, Teresa?
The motion to delay was just to delay it.
Just
So it'd be placed on pending, no date certain.
I have a question for Jeff. So what is is there a hurry, May versus November, on this component of the three recommendations from the commission? I mean, is there a hurry, May versus November?
No, I don't think so. It was a matter of getting some on the ballot for May. I think that it makes sense, rather than having 7 or 8 on the ballot in November, if you can get some of them on the ballot in May and a smaller number in November, then it gives the electorate a chance to focus on fewer ideas and think, at least hypothetically, about fewer ideas at one time. So that would be the only real reason. And part of the advantage of taking it up now is you don't have a big division between the council and the mayor where it's pointed at a single person, where you're like, of course, if you vote on it in May, then you can do it before the chair is somebody like, well, we don't need to name names. But the point is, there's not a abuse that calls for it to be placed on the council, on the electorate. And so that's probably a better time to vote on it than if you did vote on it when there was a period where the council and the mayor were feuding. So that would be an advantage, but I don't anticipate that happening between now and November either.
Okay.
I-
Sandra, and then Benny.
I really appreciate the work the Charter Revision has gone through. I mean, they've done a very good job in going through the details of things. I like the clean language, unable to serve, but I agree with my colleague, Councilwoman Ward, that there needs to be some definition. I am willing to move this forward for the electorate to vote on, but I would like to work on language to be codified, defining unable to serve and articulating very clearly what the chain of command is. Because I would very much like to know that there is always someone on the ground who is able to act in an emergency. And I also would like to know very clearly what unable to serve is, whether it's temporary incapacitation or in an airplane with the door shut and they've asked you to turn off your cell phones. So, and that's probably both, not one or the other.
Sure.
But, all right.
Benny?
I'm going to pass this. I was going to ask something that was answered, so thank you very much.
Okay.
We're good.
Is there any, yes?
I think that I agree. I think that it's important that we have someone here on the ground if disaster strikes Lincoln. I just would like to see what that language is for unable to serve before we vote to pass this forward. So I think people have a right to know what that unable to serve means. If we want to put it in an ordinance or charter, either which way, I think it's important that we see that before we vote on it.
Any other discussion? I am going to support this amendment. I was concerned about the language, and I was a little bit surprised, and I know I had follow-up discussions with Jeff, like, give me more details, give me more information. How did the Charter Revision Commission come to the conclusions that they came to so that we have a better understanding, so that we can make a really good decision on this? I do appreciate Councilwoman Ward's direction to delay it so that we turn it back to the Charter Revision Commission for further definition, further clarification. I think that's part of their job to do that. And so I am going to support this a motion to delay until we get further clarification. And I believe the chair has the last word. And I would like to have Teresa call the roll, please.
He can't speak.
She just said, yeah.
The chair typically has the last word when I ask
You can have
for-
the last word after I say something, right?
All right, Roy, I'm going to give you a
I
chance
just want
to
to clarify here. If we want to send this back to the Charter Commission, we should vote no on the resolution in front of us, not on the delay, because the delay leaves it in our hands, not the Charter Revision Commission. A vote no sends it back to the Charter Revision Commission.
Not I don't necessarily think that is the truth of that. If we vote to delay, we can direct our city attorney to call the Charter Revision Commission to gather together to further define and clarify what unable to serve is, and that is a direction that we can give them. And having a delay means that we're going to delay making a decision on this. And to, I think, everyone that's watching and on the dais, that it's pretty clear we want the Charter Revision Commission to come back and clarify this language, like in the city of Omaha. Okay, Teresa, please call the roll on the delay.
So do you want to delay with continued public hearing when it comes back?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Christensen?
No.
McGinnis?
No.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
No.
Ward?
Yes.
Washington?
No.
Bowers?
Yes.
Fails 3.
Motion lost, 3-4.
Now we have the main motion.
And now on the main motion, unless there's any other amendments. Benny?
I had no amendment. My question earlier, which I chickened out on and didn't ask, was what's before us today is a yes or no, put it on the ballot
Correct. In May.
in May. That was really our whole charge for this entire thing. Do we want it on the ballot or not?
In May.
I think in May.
In May.
Thank you. I think we had a healthy discussion, but I wanted to make sure that I was clear on that. Thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll shut up
Okay.
now.
Any other discussion? Please call the roll.
Christensen?
Yes.
McGinnis?
No.
Raybold?
No.
Schob?
Yes.
Ward?
No.
Washington?
No.
Bowers?
No.
Motion lost, 2-5.
Okay, we're on to the next one.
Okay, 5D. Placing a charter amendment on the May 2020 primary election ballot that amends the bid threshold requirement from $25,000 to $50,000, makes corresponding changes to mayor's authority to approve contracts in excess of $50,000, and delegates execution of contracts or purchases of less than $50,000, adds responsive to definition of lowest responsible bidder, removes the requirement of 3 informal bids for purchases and contracts of less than $50,000, and substitutes the more accurate term of rebid instead of re-advertise if the city rejects all bids and reopens the bidding process. Introduced by Bowers.
So moved.
Second.
Introduced by Bowers, seconded by McGinnis. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Christensen,
Yes.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Raybold,
Yes.
Schob,
Yes.
Ward,
Yes.
Washington,
Yes.
Bowers.
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0. That concludes our public hearing. Our resolutions on first reading are items 6A through H. Ordinances first reading are items 7A through N.
Good Lord, that's a lot.
Yes, sorry. And there's more coming. Our pending list date certain is item 8A. It will come off to have public hearing next week. Our pending list are items 9A and B. Anyone wishing to address the council on a matter not on this agenda and not planned to appear on a future agenda may do so at this time. And I don't.
Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on an item not on the agenda for public comment? Yes, sir, please
come on up.
Come on down.
Ooh, on the parcel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Wyatt Nelson. I live at 1601 B Street. I haven't really spoken in front of you all before, so excuse me if I don't do everything quite right. But basically, I just wanted to say thank you for the recent efforts that you all have made with the developments along 11th Street and other places in town with the pollinator gardens and the rainwater collection systems. I've noticed a lot of improvements throughout the city with that, and I just want to really say thank you because that's a really important thing right now. And I kind of wanted to say also kind of a question because, you know, I've been reviewing some of the city codes and talking with some landowners around the city. And there is some confusion, and I would like some clarification from the city council on how homeowners and people who have property that's on overlapping with the city right-of-way can contribute to helping with the pollinator gardens and with the rainwater retention and things like that. There's some very vague regulations in the city code about what exactly can and cannot be done on that area. So I just wanted to put it out there just as a conversation that I'd like to start in the city. About what can people who actually are property owners and have those easements, what can we and can we not do in those areas to make bee habitats, to make migratory butterfly habitats, to help with rainwater retention. So just thank you all for making that a priority in the city. My generation really appreciates that, and just wondering how we can go forward with that more. So that's all I have to say today, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nelson, for coming down.
You
Is
are
there anyone else that would like to participate in public comment this evening?
Seeing none, I would like to say, remember the golden rule, and I move adjournment.
Second.
Moved by Christensen, seconded by McGinnis. Please call the roll.
Christensen,
Yes.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Raybold,
Yes.
Schob,
Yes.
Yes, I said yes. The mic was
Bowers.
off. Sorry.
Yes.
I heard you. Motion carried, 7-0.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your time and attention.